never had a big head. Never was satisfied ever with my work. Never, never, never went through this. And that is my heritage.
Hollywood has produced many stars, but few have become legends by defying all norms, like Bette Davis. Looking back at her old photos today, many would think, this is clearly a movie star. Ironically, Hollywood didn't think that way when she began her career. In the early 20th century, the American film industry had a very simple formula for actresses. They had to be conventionally beautiful, gentle, likable, and most importantly, make the audience feel comfortable. Bette didn't fit any of that. She was born in 1908 in Massachusetts into a not-so-wealthy family. Her father was strict, her mother ambitious, and she always believed her daughter could achieve something greater than ordinary life. But Betty's childhood was anything but a fairy tale. When she was young, her parents divorced. Bette and her younger sister lived in a disciplined boarding school. Some later recounted that from a young age, she possessed something extraordinary. Not grace, but willpower. While many girls dreamed of being beautiful, Bette was obsessed with becoming a true actress. And so, she went to Hollywood. But instead of being welcomed as a future star, she was repeatedly rejected. Some said she was too ordinary to be on screen. Some criticized her eyes for being too big. Even at one audition, a studio representative came to pick up the actress and then left, thinking it was impossible for the girl standing before them to be about to become a movie star. Such judgments could have discouraged many, but for Bette Davis, it was just the beginning. Because what Hollywood didn't understand then was they were looking for a beautiful face, while the person who had just walked through the door was about to become a force to be reckoned with. After being looked down upon repeatedly, Bette Davis finally got her chance to appear on screen. But there was a problem. Appearing on screen didn't mean being respected. Her early roles were rather lackluster. Studios hadn't yet seen the star in the girl they'd once judged as not attractive enough. Back then, if you were an actress, you had to be perfect in front of the camera, always beautiful, always graceful, always maintaining an image. Bette didn't like that. She didn't want to just stand there as a decorative element for the male lead. She wanted the character to be angry, to be selfish, to be ambitious, to be ugly if necessary. It was a nearly groundbreaking idea. When she moved to Warner Brothers, Betty's career began to change. But success didn't come from her becoming more compliant. Quite the opposite. She was known for her opposition to scripts. If she thought a line was bad, she'd say so directly. If she didn't like a role, she'd refuse it. If she felt the studio was wasting her talent, she was ready to confront them. This made her a headache for studio executives. On one occasion, she even risked her reputation to rebel against the rigid casting system of the time. In an era where actors were practically considered studio property, that act was seen as rebellion. But that very rebellion changed everything. Audiences began to notice something special about Bette Davis. She didn't try to make viewers like her. She captivated them. On screen, she wasn't afraid to portray the most unsettling human emotions: jealousy, hurt, anger, control, ambition. While many actresses at the time tried to maintain a perfect image, Bette accepted looking tired, accepted aging, accepted becoming intimidating. And something strange happened. The audience didn't turn away. They were captivated. Hollywood began to realize that an actress didn't necessarily have to be pleasing to the eye to become a legend. But the more famous she became, Bette became increasingly uncontrollable. And very soon after, the real battles began. When Bette Davis reached her peak, she was no longer simply an actress. She became a phenomenon. Audiences no longer went to see a movie for its plot or director. They went to see it because Betty's name was on the poster. But along with power came another thing: clash. Bette was known for being extremely difficult to work with. If the director wasn't convincing enough, she would object. If an actor performed poorly, she would show her displeasure. If she felt someone was trying to control her, she was ready to confront them on set. Many called her arrogant. Many called her hot-tempered. But others saw something different. a woman trying to gain control in an industry accustomed to men making all the choices. Throughout the 1930s and 1950s, the Hollywood studio system operated almost like a giant machine. Actors were tightly controlled. They controlled not only the roles they played, but also their image, their clothing, their speech, their personal lives, and even how the public should perceive them. Bette never truly accepted that. She fought for better scripts. She demanded the right to choose directors. She wanted female characters with depth instead of just existing to support male characters. And then, each successful film gave her something very few actresses at the time possessed: influence. But there was a paradox. The more she resisted the system, the more Bette became a part of it. Hollywood began using her image as a symbol of female power. A cold, intelligent, ambitious woman who didn't apologize for it. Audiences both admired and feared her because Bette didn't sell fairy tales. She sold a sense of power. However, when a person becomes too prominent in the public eye, every action they take begins to be scrutinized. And then, at a certain point, the controversies surrounding Bette were no longer about her acting, but about who she was in real life. And that's when the first cracks began to appear in the legendary image. If on screen Bette Davis was famous for her fierce characters, in real life, many say she lived with a similar intensity. Fame brought money, power, and admiration, but it didn't guarantee happiness. And the deeper one delves into Bette's life, the more one sees a paradox that's hard to ignore. The woman who could conquer Hollywood repeatedly failed to maintain peace in her closest relationships. Bette married many times. Each marriage began with hope, and almost all ended in exhaustion. There are relationships eroded by career pressures. There are marriages overshadowed by arguments, distance, and unmet expectations. Those who were close to her often described Bette with two contrasting images. One was incredibly captivating, and she was someone who always wanted to control. But no relationship was as controversial as the one between her and her own daughter. As an adult, Bette's daughter published a memoir about her life alongside a famous star. The book portrayed a cold, unpredictable mother, sometimes overbearing and putting a lot of pressure on the family. These accounts quickly became a subject of controversy. Some believed it was the voice of a deeply wounded child. Others argued it was a personal perspective recounted after years of accumulated emotions. Then came accounts with spiritual undertones and other shocking accusations against Bette. However, many details have never been independently verified and remain more of a subject of debate than a proven fact. What is certain is that the relationship between mother and daughter has deeply broken down, and Bette suffered greatly from the public exposure of her private life. During this period, another rivalry further cemented her legendary status. It was a years-long battle with another Hollywood star. They weren't just competing for roles. They were competing for the spotlight, competing for position, competing for who would be remembered longer. And that rivalry became one of the most famous stories in Hollywood history. By the end of her life, Bette Davis no longer needed to prove herself to anyone. After decades under the spotlight, she had achieved almost everything Hollywood could offer a person: fame, money, iconic roles, the respect of her colleagues, and a place in film history. Her name no longer needed lengthy introductions. Her name alone was enough to evoke memories of a golden age of Hollywood. But success doesn't stop time. As she entered her later years, Bette's health began to decline noticeably. Physical problems became more frequent, but surprisingly, she almost never truly stopped. While many stars of her generation chose to retire into quiet life, Bette continued to take on projects, continued to appear in public, and continued to do what she had done almost her entire life: acting. For many, this is difficult to understand. After all that she had achieved, why continue? Why not rest? Perhaps because for Bette Davis, acting was never simply a job. It was where she found her self-worth. It was her way of communicating with the world. Throughout her life, she sacrificed so much for her career: relationships, marriages, personal peace, and in the end, What remained with her longest was the screen. Even when her body was no longer as strong as it once was, her presence carried immense weight. Some actors appear, and the audience sees the character. But there are others who step into the frame, carrying an entire history behind them. Bette belonged to the latter group. By 1989, that journey officially came to an end. Bette Davis's passing was not just the passing of a famous actress. It marked the end of a type of star that modern Hollywood has almost ceased to produce. People who were both revered and controversial, and who were bigger than their real lives. But what made Bette memorable decades later wasn't the number of awards or the number of films she starred in. It was her influence. Before Bette's time, actresses were expected to be gentle, elegant, and easily likable. After Bette, women on screen began to have more room to be more complex. They can be ambitious, hot-tempered, controlling, strong, and imperfect, yet still become central figures. That's a mark not everyone can leave. Of course, Bette's legacy isn't entirely simple. Some see her as a symbol of independence and willpower. Others consider her too rigid, too extreme, and sometimes hurtful to those around her. But perhaps the figures who truly change an era are rarely entirely lovable. Bette Davis didn't build an image to make people like her. She built a career that people will remember her for. And years after the lights have gone out, that name remains, not as a star, but as a legend.